All right. Hello. My name is Kristina Maldonado Bad Hand. I'm Sicangu Lakota and Cherokee, and I'm super excited to be here with two of my favorite comic creators, one of my favorite comics ever, actually, and having this opportunity to kind of interview them and talk about Indigenous knowledge and social justice in ElfQuest. So I'm going to let you two introduce yourself, and then we'll get started with some panel questions.
I am Wendy Pini, co-creator, writer, and artist of ElfQuest, the long-running fantasy series.
And I am Richard Pini, the co-creator and facilitator, editor of that very same aforementioned ElfQuest.
All right. So what is ElfQuest?
Oi.
I think you should start, and I'll chime in.
Well, for those who do not know, ElfQuest is first of all, it's a series of graphic novels. So we're talking about the comic book sequential art format. It is very long running. This is our 46th year that we're doing this. And it is a huge saga. It is sprawling. It covers the world that it happens on. It extends into the past and into the future. It mainly concerns the adventures of a group of elves. Now, these are beings that we're calling elves, but they're not your Tolkien elves. They're not your nursery rhyme elves. The main group is called the Wolf Riders. And I think you pick up.
Well, it's the story of a race of beings who come to a world that they don't belong to. They are alien to that world, and they discover it to be very harsh and hostile. And what they're trying to do is to discover who they really are, where they really came from, and can they get back there? And if not get back there, at least make a home for themselves, find a place for themselves on this harsh world where they have to struggle to survive, and to also struggle against the indigenous humans that think of them as invading demons or aliens and are frightened of them.
Now, as a fan, ElfQuest has always been really important to me and my siblings. What does the story mean to you?
Oh, well, it's our life story. It's almost autobiographical in a way. ElfQuest is about everything that Richard and I care about. Um, we are very sensitive and always have been to injustices we see around us. We're very sensitive to racial prejudice, bigotry, hate mongering, that kind of thing. And so we started the story of ElfQuest with a hate crime, with an incident like that, a burning at the stake. And the story goes from there about how it isn't a battle of good versus evil. The elves against the humans isn't about good guys and bad guys. It's about knowledge versus ignorance. As they actually manage to learn more about each other, they the less the fear it dominates the relationship, and the more curiosity takes over.
Now, here's another answer to that very same question. Wendy is a natural born storyteller, and she has been telling stories essentially since she was born. And throughout all of those different tales runs a common thread, and that thread is a person or a being or a group of people or a group of beings looking for community, looking for tribe, looking for family.
Mm-hmm.
This echoes, Wendy said that ElfQuest is to greater or lesser extent autobiographical. This thread echoes the fact that Wendy was adopted. And so on some level, she herself has been seeking community, tribe, family, and ElfQuest is the latest, and I will say greatest expression of that search.
I'm glad you mentioned all that with as a fan being a Native person, I didn't really see very much representation of really the communities I was used to growing up. And so that's one of the things that really stood out to my siblings and I about ElfQuest was just the diversity and kind of the tribal mindset and just a lot of the characters. We felt kind of a connection with the characters. And what I really loved about it was there is so much diversity in ElfQuest. So what kind of inspired that? Then the nature of the elves, they're also very different when you get into the different races.
Yes, and the different personalities of the individual characters. Well, you see, I grew up in a very conservative Republican family. You know, I was adopted into a difficult family, and I never fit in. I never, you know, they had their ideas about how to live and what was right and what was wrong, and none of it stuck with me. None of it felt right. So that's another reason I had this obsession with looking for like-minded other people. And I found like-minded other people in all sorts of different kinds of people. And I was so excited about that as I got older and I began to discover fandom and comics and my artwork began to be appreciated in a way it never was before. I began to find more of a sense of community with the diversity that was in fandom at the time, you know, LGBTQ people that I was never exposed to growing up, you know, different races, different points of view, uh, and it had a lot to do with what people read. You know, people who read fantasy and science fiction get exposed to a lot of inventive, innovative ideas. And so I was hearing all of this, and it was so exciting, so very different from how I grew up. And I knew I was closer to home than I had ever been before.
When she sat me down and told me the story of ElfQuest, now I was a voracious reader of science fiction fantasy as a kid and comics, and particularly in the earlier days of comics, when Marvel, the upstart company, was coming on, one of the refreshing things that I saw there was that there was real humanity to the characters. They weren't cardboard. They fought with each other. They wisecracked with each other, and this was appealing just because it was beyond the stereotypical borders of superhero slugfesting. Wendy sat me down and told me the story of ElfQuest, and it was populated with all of these different characters. And I found that tremendously appealing. Is that, oh, here's this male character, but he's gentle and he's a nurturer. Here's a female character and she's the hunter for the group. And I thought, okay, that's different. That's not Tolkien. That's not what I'm used to. And it was it was it really was inspiring to want to try to get this story out there.
And each of us had an avatar in the story. Cutter who is the chief of the Wolf Riders, was the character that spoke for me. I just related to him, and everything that he cared about, I cared about. And Skywise, of course, is Richard's elf, because Richard has always had a tremendous interest in astronomy and the universe and the stars. And Skywise is the stargazer.
And he's also a wise guy, and I'm a wise guy. And, you know, she keeps me in line with her overarching vision, and I keep her in line, you know, don't get too full of yourself. And, you know, it has worked for a long, long time.
I've always loved Lita personally. Lita is my favorite.
Yeah, tell us why. I'd love to know why Lita is your favorite.
Yeah, I always loved the healer aspect. I'm kind of that role in my family. I tend to do a lot of the mediating and like taking on people's struggle and helping to kind of sort things out. My grandma calls me the diplomat in the family. So I just always loved like Lita's character. I love the way she looks, her hair and her eyes is just like a something that I really got drawn to her. I always loved green eyes. I was like, when I was a kid, I was always bummed that I wasn't born with green eyes because there actually are some like Lakota people that have green eyes. And I was like, why didn't I get that gene? Like, I wanted
Mhm.
green eyes.
Well,
So
your eyes are beautiful, but have you ever played with contacts?
yeah, I have. I've cosplayed X-23, so
Great.
I did the green eyes and everything. But especially when she has like Suntop and Ember, I always loved her as a mother. She was just like she's just a great character. And all of the struggles that she has with healing and being in that place where she has all this power to heal, but then she also can hurt when she realizes that. I loved that character arc because it's like you realize that you have the power to heal, but in being that empath and having that power to heal people, you also have the ability to harm them.
Yes, if you try to push your will on them, if they, people only heal when they're ready for it. And she had to learn that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, well, actually, there certainly are aspects of Lita in my personality because, like you, I'm an empath and I always want to help, and I, I don't like people to hurt, but I had to learn very much that, let people come to you and let them tell you what they need. Don't tell them what you think they need.
Yeah, definitely. Or try to like wrangle them to the point of being like, well, you talked to me now. Now I need you to do what you asked for advice. But people are people. They'll do it in their own time. And I agree. That's a lesson
Yes.
I've had to learn as well. So I love following that and kind of growing with the characters along the way. On that note of characters, there's actually my next question is that there's many different races and creatures and really communities in the world of ElfQuest. So even the castle and the world itself seem to have their own narrative in the story.
Yeah.
So how did you navigate the deep relationship between all of those characters throughout this whole series?
Well, there's the glue that holds the whole story together, the hero's journey, and that's Cutter. Cutter's journey. Cutter's quest is to go out and try to find all the scattered elf tribes that he thinks might be out there, but he's not sure. So his quest is to find them. And his vision is if we can all be united, if we can just come together in commonality, we have a much better chance of surviving in this harsh world than if we're all scattered and afraid of each other. So that's his goal, and so it's always through Cutter that the different tribes, the different kinds of elves come together. There isn't really different races of elves. There's just different tribes, different kinds, because the elf race is really just one race, just like we humans are one race, really, So, but during the course of his quest and those who come with him, he just brings everybody together in new knowledge and discovery of, hey, we're more alike than we're not.
Except, just as you were talking about Lita, she has this power and she can effect change on other characters. Cutter's goal to unite all the phrase we use is lost and scattered children of the high ones,
Mhm.
because they really do come from another world.
Yeah.
And over millennia of time, they have scattered to different parts of the world. They have adapted to living in those different parts of the world. Those adaptations have caused them bodily change. And Cutter's vision to unite everyone is a very noble one, But as we find out, not everybody necessarily wants to be part of this greater grouping
Mhm.
because they have adapted just fine to the style of life and the conditions that they've known all of their existence. And so once again, it's a matter of choice. I welcome you to join this greater community, but I'm not going to force you to join this greater
Yeah.
community.
Yeah, and out of that grew all the different personalities, because there are ways to create conflict in a story that don't involve violence and fighting and blood. For me and Richard, conflict of people trying to get along with each other and figure each other out and work out intertribal problems and things like that is far more fascinating than people beating each other up. Although some of that does happen in ElfQuest.
Some conflicts just need a good pounding, and we recognize that as a part of life and storytelling
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, that's actually that referencing that fight, that was like the catalyst for my sister and I when Cutter and Rayak like go at it. We were like,
Oh, boy.
yeah, okay, that was long overdue. Like that whole book, we were both like, oh my gosh.
Well, it was an epic battle, but my favorite part of it is how it resolved, because Ray keeps saying, "You haven't had enough. You haven't had enough," and that just eggs Cutter on to just bust him. And then finally, it gets to the point where Cutter realizes
The light bulb goes on.
the light bulb goes on. He's doing this for me, not to me. He's saying, "I haven't had enough of my revenge, and I should keep going." And it was that light bulb moment that is my favorite part of the story.
Yeah, mine too is such a good book. So that actually kind of brings me to the you mentioned the hero's journey earlier.
Yes.
So as I mentioned, kind of the stories and things I grew up with are very traditional to Indigenous knowledge, and I actually found a lot of those themes were very prominent in ElfQuest. I would say almost more so than the generic hero's journey that I would see. So like the difference between Indigenous storytelling and the hero's journey is that Indigenous storytelling often follows the traditional knowledge cycle of belonging, independence, mastery, and generosity. And as a fan, I felt more that Cutter's journey and even Lita's, as we've mentioned, really follows that, because you have this searching for belonging, and then you get to the point of generosity where you're including everybody and inclusive and wanting to give back is like the final step there. But you go through this whole thing of like getting to belonging, being in that independent search for something, and then mastering whatever it is that you're trying to, like what your point is, and then you get back to being inclusive and understanding that people have to come to you on their own time, and that you can't force this change on people, you can't force that unity on people.
Yeah.
So yeah,
But
so
what
that was
you
my question, was this intentional, or was that just kind of like it ended up in lining?
But see, what you just described the hero's journey, because it starts out with belonging. The hero starts out in his comfort zone, in the situation he's always known. Then he sets out on his journey, and he becomes independent. He has to find his way. Then in the course of achieving mastery, he meets all his guides, his mentors, his foes, his arch enemies. He faces death. And then when he goes through all of that and achieves mastery over all of that, then he comes back with what Joseph Campbell calls the elixir. He brings that back to the village. The village is like a symbol, of whatever community he came from. So really, the classic hero's journey as described by Joseph Campbell is very much like what you just described, and the generosity is bringing the elixir back and sharing it with all the tribe. And so what Cutter does at the end of his quest is they find the origin of the High Ones. They find where they came from. They find the star home, and they can go back to it if they want, or they can Some of them can choose to stay, and some of them do. So everybody gets their heart's desire. And, that's when his life ends, because he really completed everything he set out to do. He's a very finished and complete character by the end of the story.
Now, specifically to your question, however, there are different ways to manifest or to express what you described, or what Wendy has just described as the hero's journey. And to my mind, there are three really large groupings of expression. One is European, one is Asian, and one is native to the Americas.
Mhm.
And the European expression of the hero's journey, speaking for myself, was always grand, but it felt impersonal. High elves were always above and beyond. The Asian or Eastern tradition is very complex.
Mhm.
The Native American version is so nature oriented, so environment oriented,
That everything's connected.
everything's connected, and there's the people in the land, and they're the same thing. It felt very real, very much more real than the other two. Not to put them down at all, because they are both rich with tradition. But I think it was that the native expression just felt more real to the story.
Well, what I want to get into, and this is so exciting because it's common to all cultures, European and Asian, as well as Native American, is the myth of the Star People. I'm sure you've heard of the Star People or the Sky People or whatever. These are beings. These are advanced beings who came, and they came as teachers and healers, and they were from somewhere else. They were from the stars. And in many Native American societies, the term is the Star People. In Celtic and Irish mythology, it's the Shining Ones. And oh gosh, the Asians have so many different names. I can't even land on one to tell you. But it's all the same idea, that there have been these beings who are not from here, but who came here, who visited here, and they left us gifts of knowledge and learning, and the will to explore. And the myth persists that some of them stayed, and they're still here. In Ireland and in the Norse countries, they believe that they call them the little people, or in Ireland they still call them the Shining Ones, are still there. They might live underground, or in hidden places, but they're still there, and they're still influencing human life, and just reminding us that there's something more, there's something bigger than just us. Do you relate to that?
Oh yeah, big time. And like I said, I'm Lakota, so we come from the stars. I mean, even with our when someone passes away, we have star quilts that are always around them for and 3 days before they go, they get buried with their star quilts. So it's kind of a way of returning to the stars. But even what you mentioned with the little people, like we have so many like jokes and stuff where if you can't find anything, it's the little people that took the things. So like I was living with my sister last year, and she's my home class sister. So my dad named her. She's not my blood sister, but we were living, and anytime she would lose something, she'd be like, "It's the little people." And one of the things that is always was kind of taught to me is that if you name those things, then they'll pick on you more. And so I was always teasing her because I was like, every time you say it's the little people, you just make it worse because you're constantly saying their name and constantly like drawing attention, which means you're going to lose more things. Like she
Well,
lost her
see,
keys, all kinds of different socks. Like,
there's a lot of wisdom in that, because in Hawaii it's the menehune,
mhm.
and they are very mischievous. And in Japan it's the carpet fairies.
Mhm.
You know, like
That's right.
if you stick toothpicks in the carpet, the carpet fairies get really mad and they take revenge on you.
Yeah, and you know, especially all my cousins on the res have all kinds of stories and things around little people and like just things that are can't be explained. Or star people is definitely one that is known uh, throughout most tribes. Actually, that's one of the things I love about Marvel's Kahori when they created this new superhero, the fact that she basically is a sky person because of falling through a portal with the Tesseract. So it's like really cool how they managed to weave in traditional stories in that way. And I think that's actually one of the things that's always called to me for ElfQuest is it actually felt like a lot of our traditional stories.
Yes. What's kind of spooky though is I didn't know any of this. When ElfQuest got started in the mid 1970s, it was coming from some instinctual place in my imagination, but finding out the lore of all these different cultures that I love came came later and much later. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute, you know, where did that come from? So sometimes there have been people who have told me that maybe ElfQuest was like a channeling, you know,
Mhm.
maybe some wisdom from the star people that I didn't know about, but I was just channeling it. So I'm willing to accept that.
Right. Yeah. Well, I always say that synergies happen when you're on the right path because I found that there's a lot of moments like that in
Yeah.
life where if you're going down where you're supposed to go, sometimes those synergies happen where it's like you didn't intentionally do that, but it lines up perfectly. My husband's comic was like that since he named it Pia. He actually named it after his youngest daughter, and then a lady stopped by and saw it and she's like, oh, that my name is Pia and it actually in Mayan means little creature, and his comic has all these little creatures in it. And so it was like perfect, it aligned very well with his comic book, but he didn't know that ahead of time when he named it Pia. He just named it based off of the nickname of his youngest daughter because they used to call her Sophia Sopapia, and so then it became Pia, and it just
Yeah.
like connected perfectly. So it's funny how that happens.
Synchronicities like that. I agree with you. I think they are messages that you're on the right track.
All right, so there's a lot of character development and backstory in ElfQuest that has you sympathizing with characters that would otherwise be considered the villain. Um, and so who or what is the actual villain of the story?
Gosh, that's a tough question. And we've been asked it before, especially by Hollywood types, because in Hollywood, they want good guys versus bad guys. They want to know who the bad guy is.
Which is a binary way of looking at things.
Mhm.
It's black or white, and
Yeah.
we don't roll that way in telling the story. I remember a discussion wherein um, there are villains, there are adversaries, there are foes, there are antagonists,
Yes.
and
And there's your noble opposition. Like, for example, Strongbow fights with Cutter all the time in the earliest part of the story, but he's more like the noble opposition. Rayek is Cutter's foe. You know, he's not a villain because he has his own point of view and he's coming from his own point of view, but he's Cutter's foe. Winnowill, I would say, of all of our characters, comes the closest to being our arch villain. They say that the best villains want the same thing as the hero does, and she does. She wants to unite all elves, but
but
they've got to be pure. They can't be tainted in any way by the world that they've lived on for so long. So she really looks down on the wolf riders as tainted beings who don't even deserve to live. And her idea is to unite all the elves and take them back to the star home where they belong. but she goes about it the wrong way. But she wants exactly the same thing Cutter wants. And that's what makes her the arch villain, I think. We have bad guys, like there are some of the trolls, like King Guttlecraw was a real bad guy. You couldn't reason with him. I think the characters that can't be reasoned with, who only come at life through violence
or greed,
or greed.
or
Yeah,
ego.
yeah. Those are the ones that you can call the bad guys or the villains. But the arch villain, the arch nemesis, that would have to be Winnowill.
Winnowill has such a long history, and there have been so many pushes and pulls in that history that she is far too complicated to be good guy, bad guy.
Mhm.
And a lot of her stories have been told. There is a resolution to her story that has yet to be told. And yeah, I can't see her as a villain. She's loveless. She's hurting.
Well, that's what Sava described her as. Think of it as the absence of love. But many ElfQuest fans just adore her. They just love her. See, and that's the attraction of what you call the shadow. The shadow side is very seductive to people, and they get fascinated with vampires and witches and warlocks and characters who walk the shadow path. And Winnowill is definitely a shadow character, but another shadow character, the hero's shadow, is actually Rayek. Rayek is kind of like a mirror image of Cutter, but he's what Cutter would be if Cutter were walking the shadow path. So Rayek walks that for him in the story. And just like Cutter and Tamain, the high one, the oldest one, the first comer, just like Cutter and Tamain are united and of one soul and one body. Rayek is united with Winnowill in the course of the story, and yet his is a great tragedy because he truly loves her. He truly deeply loves her, and he sees past all her sickness to the goodness in her, and that's where he wants her to get to. But
But he still wants her to get there his way.
That's the
He's
problem.
still trying to fix her.
Still trying to fix her.
He hasn't completed his own arc.
Yeah.
In that, so it's a real dance, and keeping track of who's got the upper hand today.
That's just an indication of how complicated the story is.
Yeah, I think definitely just with there's a lot of parallels in characters that kind of walk this similar path, but they're on, like you said, the opposite sides, where it's like the two pathways of either you choose to be like open to people coming to you, or you try to control that, you try to fix, you try to like make people do what you want them to do. And yeah, I personally love Winnowill as well. I feel like she's a very tragic character. I always felt really bad for her. But yeah, she's just gorgeous. I feel like that's part of the reason why everybody loves Winnowill. She's such a cool character.
She is just gorgeous, isn't she?
Yeah, I'm like, that's always been the big thing for my sister and I. We're like, we want her hair. all the different colors in her hair and everything. It's like all pretty.
It's like a crow's wing. It's iridescent. It has all the greens and purples and blues. Yeah. Oh, I know. I'm in love with her too. I always have been.
Yeah, I'm sure you've probably seen some pretty awesome cosplays of her over the years.
Actually, over the years we have. People have portrayed different aspects of her. And I'm amazed at how many different kinds of people can identify with her and portray her. So
well, I feel like it's also that struggle of like her wanting to unify people, but of that mindset. There's a lot of that like higher opinion of like what's pure and what's impure, even within Native community. You know, we have the like blood quantum versus tribal enrollment and all of that. And that's a struggle that's very real in our community, is people seeing tribal enrollment as being, that's how you know you're Native, rather than if you grew up with a culture, if you know you're Native, but you just don't have that certificate of Indian blood because you don't have enough. That's a big struggle. That is a conversation now. You know, we have the situation of pretendians where people say that they're Native, but they have no actual proof of it. And that then they take advantage and they take opportunities that other people could use, essentially. But there's that pedigree and like hierarchy that kind of comes from tribal enrollment and from having a certificate of Indian blood. But we're like the only people that have to show prove that with a little number and everything. So then that goes back to a whole other issue.
Oh my goodness, that's a whole story in itself, right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, so and that's actually like one of the things that I liked about Winnowill when she had that like that mindset, is I was like, I feel like this could be a really good lesson for some people if you read this, like look at how Winnowill is and how you actually point out that that's not a good way to be, because then you're closing yourself off, you're isolating yourself.
And she, if she got all the pure bloods together, she'd still want to be on top.
Yeah.
You know, so the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah.
And we're just more complicated because we can't send, because we can't tell who's speaking the truth and who's shining us on.
Yeah, what Richard means by send is telepathy. That's another quality that the elves in ElfQuest have, is the ability to communicate telepathically. And one of the really positive sides of that is you can't lie. You know, so trust is easier to gain if they can communicate telepathically. But Winnowill uses it uses their own powers against them. She twists. She's the only elf in all of ElfQuest who can lie. And she does it abundantly. And she's able to get inside another elf's head and make them doubt what they're thinking or feeling. And she's able to just get right in there. That's what makes her really cruel. She's a cruel villain.
It just occurred to me that might also be what makes her popular, because we as human beings are, you know, we've bred ourselves to play games. And if it gives us an advantage sometimes to not quite be as honest as we might otherwise be. And here's Winnowill, who is the beautiful shining example of someone who does it and gets away with it.
And she gets away with it partly because of her goddess-like quality that's just so overwhelming. So she uses every advantage she has. And you know, that makes a great villain.
I also kind of felt like Winnowill was a shadow of Lita in a sense, because where Lita's an empath, like Winnowill feels very narcissistic, and narcissists and empaths actually have similar qualities.
Absolutely. Just as Rayek is Cutter's shadow, Winnowill is Lita's shadow. Winnowill is what happens to a healer when their powers turn inward on themselves and they end up hurting others rather than healing. And you know, Lita feels tremendous compassion for that and tried at least twice to heal Winnowill. But again, she was trying to force healing on her, and you can't do that.
You have to want it, and
yeah.
Winnowill hasn't wanted it yet.
Yeah, so
yeah, for sure. So was this journey easy creating ElfQuest? Is there any moment where you guys
piece of cake.
Is there any moment where you felt like you should give up, or where the struggle was really hard?
Only every other day.
I just had this image. Was it easy?
Was it easy?
We had this glove and it had some jewels in it, and we did that, and there was ElfQuest.
It's as easy as writing your own biography for 46 years. You know?
When Wendy told me the story in 1977, I was intrigued and excited. And then we had to set about actually doing it. I didn't know a thing about comics publishing or printing or distribution or marketing or any of the business end of things. Now, you had been an artist for years already, and you actually had been drawing comics, doing panel layouts.
Yeah,
You knew
I
what
sort of knew
you knew what
how to do it.
You knew what you were about.
Yeah.
And so in a purely nuts and bolts logistical sense, no, it wasn't easy. I don't think it ever was easy, but the more I and we both learned about the process of the business, the more we were able to work within it without bumping up against obstacles every other week and so on.
It was tremendously labor intensive for both of us. We would finish an issue, put it to bed, and jump right into the next one without a break, without any kind of celebration or anything like that. I think the thing I regret most over the years is that the work kept me in my chair and at my drawing boards for so many hours every day that I didn't really have much of a chance, as I would have liked, to interact with other people in the business and make closer friendships with other folks who were doing exactly what I was doing. And, you know, thank goodness for the internet that came along.
Well, before the internet, there were conventions, and we
Yeah.
would go and we would meet people that we knew for years who were also working in comics. Now, very many of them were working for Marvel or DC generally. And so they would see each other in the offices, you know.
Mhm.
We were in our little log cabin up in the wilds of Poughkeepsie. And that was another factor that isolated us is almost too harsh, but it just, as Wendy said, we were putting in 25-hour days every
Yeah.
day. And now, of course, I mean, look at what we're doing. We're talking to each
Yeah.
other. You're thousands of miles away, and we're having a conversation. And so we're making up for lost time.
Yes.
We're seeing more people that we would like to have seen more of before.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. And the reason I asked that is because, you know, we have a lot of young comic artists and people that are creating their own stories that were inspired by ElfQuest or wanting to do more independent comics. And I think everyone gets in this space of like, well, this is hard, so I must not be doing it right.
If it's hard, you're doing it exactly right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I can understand why, if you feel like you are just working through molasses and it's going so slow and it's like pulling teeth, what other metaphors can I come up with? I can understand why you might think, well, you know, I must be doing something wrong because it's not flowing out of me. But really, you know, you do have to slog your way through sometimes. Sometimes your creativity just goes to sleep for a while and you have to rely on skill if you have a deadline to meet. Another rule that we've always lived by is let it go at 80%. Don't try to be a perfectionist. Don't even try for perfection. There really isn't any such thing. But
the phrase that I love the most is don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yeah.
Because sometimes good is better than perfect.
Yeah.
It's more in the moment. Another thing I think that is a little bit of a mental trap. You were talking about young people who are doing their own comics right now, and they're using ElfQuest as an example, and we're tremendously honored by that.
Yes.
And they say, look, ElfQuest is this wonderful success, and it's this, that, and the other thing. And I said, yeah, you're looking at it today, you haven't even lived as long as we've been doing it. You haven't been around when a distributor declared bankruptcy, owing us $50,000 that we had to bite, you know, to eat that debt. You haven't been around when a printer screwed up 10,000 copies and we had to reprint. So don't, you know, we're happy to be an example, but don't polish us too shiny, because it has been a lot of work to get here, and there is no substitute for that.
If you are doing your own independent comic, you are automatically on a hero's journey. And you are going to cross the threshold, you're going to go out independent, you're going to meet everything on the hero's journey. You're going to meet foes, you're going to meet competitors, you're going to meet mentors and advisors, and you're going to meet friends and allies. And you have to learn to recognize them all and to see where they fit into your journey.
And what's the darkest part of the journey?
Oh, the cave.
The cave. You're gonna
Yeah.
go into the cave,
Yeah.
and you're gonna wonder if you're gonna wake up the next morning, sometimes even literally, but certainly figuratively. There have been thankfully very few, but a couple of instances in the story of Warp Graphics, our company, where we were in that cave.
Oh yeah.
And I remember trying to get out of there was like trying to dig yourself out from under a mountain with a teaspoon.
Yeah. Yeah, and you've got to be prepared to be transformed. You take this journey, you set out, you stick your neck out to tell your story. And it's real important to stick to it and tell that story, because the story is important and you've got to tell it. That's your job. That's your mission, your quest. Well, be prepared to be transformed by it. Your story is going to transform others. That's why you're doing it. That's the whole purpose of telling a story, is to create transformation in whoever hears it. But you yourself are going to get transformed, and you will be taken, I guarantee you, out of your comfort zone.
Oh yeah.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Well, on that note, I know you guys have had some really exciting celebrations lately, so tell me what's next.
Oh
well,
goodness.
you know, celebrations, we had a huge celebration in 2018 because that was 40 years. And the last issue of the Final Quest, the culmination of that huge arc, was released 40 years to the day after the first appearance of ElfQuest. We are working on a number of things. The word is out. It's no secret that Fox has optioned ElfQuest, and they have committed to a pilot, which means we have some wonderful people working with us who have some serious credit in the entertainment business. Fox wants to see a pilot. That pilot is being written, or it has just been written, and now they're looking at it. Heaven only knows what their reaction is. We have learned over many years not to get too terribly excited.
Yeah.
But there are some new book projects,
yes,
that we're working on.
There's more ElfQuest story to tell, and we're starting to get excited. We're starting to have those conversations that we've had throughout our whole creative relationship about telling the story. As Richard said, we still have Rayek's story to finish.
Yeah, and COVID knocked the world out, and it knocked us out a little bit. It knocked our publisher, Dark Horse, out a little bit. But now, 4 years, going on 5 years after, we're starting to get the RPMs back up to where they were, and it feels really good.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interest in ElfQuest, and we're happy to feed that interest to the extent that we can. And we're having fun doing it.
We're still having fun. just in
That's
case
good.
you were wondering.
That's important for sure. I refer to COVID as the vortex. So we
Oh, yeah.
understand.
You could also call it the flushing toilet.
That's a vortex.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's like moments where I think something happened a year ago and I'm like, oh no, that was 2019. This is like 2024. That was like a 4-year gap there. Yeah,
We
it's a vortex.
we still don't know how to talk about that 4 or 5 year period and the changes that it is still causing.
Yeah.
COVID is with us now the way the flu is. We're going to be dealing with it for the next 100 years,
Mhm.
hopefully on as minor a scale, which is not to say minor, but comparatively.
Yeah.
All right. Well, do you guys have any conventions coming up this year where people can find you?
Yes.
Oh, heavens, yes, we've been doing that. We just did one 3 days ago in Pennsylvania. It was a 1 day show and it was a wonderful show, Lehigh Valley Comic Convention.
We've got CradleCon coming up in
We've got
May.
Cradle Con, which is on Long Island, coming up the middle of May, and that's going to be unique for at least two reasons. First of all, the venue is a museum of aviation and aerospace, which just pleases the heck out of me. But the second reason is there's a celebration on the Saturday of the convention of Wendy's career as a costumer and a cosplayer and a pioneer in those fields. There are going to be 4 of your handmade spectacular costumes on display there. In June, we'll be at Heroes Con down in North Carolina. And we're still looking at the calendar for the rest of the year. But yes, if you go to the elfquest.com website and click on the calendar page, that's where we list everything that we're doing.
Yeah.
So, well, it's a little bit of a shameless plug. IACON this year is in October, and I'd love to have you both back and actually have you this year, Richard. But
Yes.
yeah, the IACON
Talk
in
to us. Talk
yeah,
to
for
us.
sure. After this, for sure, I'll message you and see if we
You
can
know
get you
where
guys
we
back.
are.
Yes.
ICON is so much fun, and my favorite part was the dancing. I was
You know,
just
you're
out
on our
there.
website. Wendy, you're on our website, dance. If you go to our little video from the con last year, I actually had a couple ElfQuest fans like comment and be like, "Oh my gosh, I see Wendy." I was like, "Yep, yeah." But yeah, we're in October this year, Denver's Indigenous Comic and Arts Festival, and we've got a lot of really cool things planned. So I will definitely message you guys about being guests again this year.
Please do.
But
Thank you.
we're about at time, so I wanted to thank you for this conversation and being able to share the story of ElfQuest with everybody. Is there anything you would like to add?
Just sending loads of love. We're living in really turbulent times right now, and everybody is, you know, kind of worried, concerned, whatever. And I just wanted to send loads of love to all the original Americans. I, and I can't say it often enough that there's so much respect and so much love that needs to be shown. And I encourage everyone to just learn more about America's true first people. and, and we will always be sending that love.